Today, we're going to deploy our Universal SSR Nuxt app. We'll start the video by choosing our strategy, and that's going to save us time later on and help us minimize the pain that we go through in order to get this thing going. Then we're going to deploy a bare Nuxt app. So this is probably what you've seen on a lot of other tutorials, and the reason why is because this part is really easy. You just follow the instructions in the documentation. But then things get more interesting. We're going to connect our Nuxt app to a backend API server so we can start sending data back and forth. And then we'll wrap up all the other issues that crop up during a moderately complex deploy. This is a standalone video that anyone with basic Nuxt knowledge should be able to benefit from. But if you're curious about the app that we're going to be deploying today, there is a currently 22-part series where we build it from scratch. And the link to that will be in the show notes. All right, time to get started. There are two parts to our strategy. The first is choosing what service we're going to deploy on. And the second is deciding how we're actually going to approach the process of deploying. We'll start with choosing the service. So there are 10 different services listed in the Nuxt.js FAQ. Of those 10, 5 only work for serverless or statically generated sites. But we want a server-rendered universal app. So that leaves Azure Portal, Doku, Google App Engine, Heroku, and using Nginx as a proxy on a server you run yourself. Now, that categorization into ones that can do server-side rendering and those that can't is based on my skimming of this documentation. So if you know something different, please comment below. With that said, which one of these are we going to choose? Well, I'm most familiar with Heroku. I can't say that it's necessarily better than the others, but it's good enough and it's something I'm familiar with. And so that's what we're going with today. The next issue that we're going to have to contend with is how to actually approach the deployment. So when creating this video, I ran headlong into like 5 different problems all at once because I tried to take our complex app and put it on a server. And so there were multiple things that I didn't understand. And when I fixed one, another would just pop up in its place. So that was really difficult, both on a technical level and on a morale level. Because when you solve a problem, you don't want like 2 more problems to sprout up. My advice then is to start deploying as soon as possible. So here, do it right at the beginning. That is, if you want to optimize for ease of deployment. There's a reason why a lot of the deployment tutorials make it look so easy, because they initialize a Nuxt app and then deploy it. That's simple. But what if you've already committed a bunch of code? And I'm sure a lot of you have created a lot more code than what I have. Well, we can kind of cheat the system. So we can copy this commit hash, and then we can go ahead and check it out, and then create a new branch called deploy base. And then we're going to make a commit here, which will deploy this. And so that'll let us get all of our basic configuration out of the way. And then what we'll do is we'll keep on going further in the app and layering on stuff, changing it to accommodate all the new complications that are introduced in the app. That way we can tackle things one by one as they emerge, instead of getting hit with all of the issues at once. All right, so let's deploy our basic app. So we've went ahead and made a branch that is basically right after we initialized our Nuxt app. So that'll make things as simple as possible. Then, to get started, first you'll need to make sure you have a Heroku account, and then you'll need to download the Heroku CLI. Heroku has good documentation for both of those things, so I won't go over them here. Alright, so we can go ahead and create our app by typing in Heroku create and then giving it a name. Call this view-screencasts-nuxt. If you don't put in a name, then it will automatically create one for you, but it's much easier if you can tell what it's referring to. We can go ahead and check out the page that Heroku has made for us automatically. There is nothing there really, but it does tell us that we've created it successfully. If you put in some gibberish, then it'll say no such app. Now let's start getting our app ready for deploy. So there are a couple steps we'll have to take. So we're going to have to set some configuration on Heroku first, and you can do it in the Heroku app online, or you can do it in the command line, which I prefer. So you can copy this and paste it in the command line. So this first one is going to set the npm config production variable to false. And what that does is it'll tell Heroku to install the dev dependencies. And that'll help us to run npm run build or yarn build. Previously, we've been using yarn dev. And yarn dev has the advantage that if we change something in our code, then it'll automatically reload. And that can save us a lot in development time. But on a server, we're not going to be changing the code and waiting for it to hot reload. What we're wanting is speed. And so we split it up into yarn build, which takes our code and builds something optimized. Then, on the server, we can run yarn start, which will run it in production mode, like this. Here, everything is minimized, gzipped, and optimized. We don't really have to worry about the details. Just know that production mode is faster than development mode. Anyways, let's set these other two variables. So we'll be setting the host to a bunch of zeros and the node environment to production. So we'll copy these and we will paste them in our CLI. Excellent, they're both set. If you want to look at your configuration variables from the command line, just type in Heroku config and hit enter. And then it'll display the ones you've set. Alright, we've set our configuration variables. Now we need to create the Heroku post build script. And what we're going to tell it to do is run npm run build, or yarn build. I realize that the naming of this is a little bit funny. We're telling it to build in our post build hook, but post build means after node is finished setting up. So installing all our packages. And then this build is building our actual Nuxt app. So let's go ahead and copy this line, and we'll go to our package.json file. And on the last line, we will go ahead and put this. We could also just put in Nuxt build directly, since that's what it's going to be calling if we call it yarn build. So now that that's set, Heroku knows what to do after building our Node app. We need to tell it now how to actually start our app. And so we'll copy this line and put it in the proc file. And so this proc file is going to be on the base directory of our project. And it's going to have just this one line. A little context if you're interested. So Heroku has different types of dynos. They have worker dynos, web dynos, and maybe more by now. And so this is basically saying, all right, the web dynos are going to run this command. That's how they're going to be started. And now, according to this documentation, everything is set up. So let's go ahead and actually deploy our app. If we were on the master branch, we would just type in this line. But we are currently on the deploy base branch. And so we'll type in git push Heroku deploy-base : master. And there's no space here. All right, we hit enter and watch it deploy. All right, I'm speeding this up to 3 times its normal speed. All right, so first you can see that we're installing Node, and then we're installing the dependencies through Yarn. Now we're running Nuxt build, and so that is compiling our Nuxt app. There we go, there are all those files. And now we're going to prune the dev dependencies. That's pretty cool. So the stuff that was required to build it won't necessarily be in the production code. Now we're caching it and releasing it. Now to test this out, we can type Heroku open. And our app is working. Something interesting is that this worked even though we haven't committed our changes. But we should still commit them. First, because good form, and second, because we'll need to cherry pick this commit in a later branch. And so that is how we deploy our very basic Nuxt app. To review, we need to set the configurations, and we can run that in the command line. And then we need to add this to our package.json and add this to a proc file. So it's actually very little code we did, but we understand a lot more of the process that's going on. Then we can deploy by typing git push Heroku, then the name of our branch, then : then master. Our goal in this section is to take the momentum from our successful deploy from a very basic Nuxt app, and then apply it to our app in a more complex state. In this case, after we've already integrated with the server API. So for our server, I've already created a Heroku app for that. I've already deployed it. This homepage will show an error, but if we go to API/videos, we'll see that we've already have some videos that I've placed in there, and some tags as well. Next, we'll go to our git commit history, and we'll find the commit where we first introduce talking to the API. So here, instead of returning a pre-built array of videos, we are using Axios to get videos from our API. All right, so we will grab this hash and we will check out from there, and then we will check out a new branch, and we'll call this deploy/data. Then we'll go back to our git history, and we'll find our deploy base branch and grab that commit as well. And we will cherry pick that commit. And so now we have our previous work for deployment on this new branch. And of course, our Heroku configurations are still set up as well. Let's try naively deploying this without making any other changes. And our app is failing. There is not a whole lot of information here. So let's go to the CLI and type in Heroku logs --tail. So that'll give us the most recent logs, and then it'll update whenever there are new ones. All right, so our app has crashed. And these don't give great hints until we get here. So web process failed to bind to port within 60 seconds of launch. And it's trying to listen on this port. Interesting. So let's see if we have anything on port within our app. And it turns out we are manually setting the port to 8000. And so this was initially done to not conflict with our development API server. But in production, we do not want to manually set the port. And so what we can do is do an OR here. So we can do process.env.port. And so basically, if there's already a port set, such as will be on the Heroku server, then it'll use that one. Otherwise, it'll use 8000, such as in development. Let's commit this, and then redeploy. Now when we reload, we see that we get a new and possibly more interesting server error. So let's go ahead and tail our logs so we can get a little bit more detail. All right, we can see that now, since we're not setting it to 8000 by default, it does whatever it wants to and it works. Now we're getting error connection refused for 3000. So this is interesting. We know that 127.0.0.1 is another word for localhost, and so it's refusing to connect to localhost 3000, which just so happens to be what our development server is. So it looks like we hard-coded our development server into our production server, which we don't want to do. So we're going to do the same thing here. If there's process.env. Call it base URL, then we'll use that. Otherwise, we'll use the development server. The port variable is set automatically by Heroku, but for this variable, we're going to have to take this into our own hands. So type Heroku config set, and then we will copy the name of the variable, base URL, and set it equal to the server. And so we will take off the /videos, but leave the API and the rest of it as well. Now we need to commit that and deploy. And now we can see that we have the data displaying correctly. It's not very complex data, but that's okay. This was early on in our process. So in this section, we got the data working, specifically the first time that we started using data. We went to that commit and then cherry-picked our Heroku config, and then added on top of that. What we changed was when we're specifying the port, we made it so if there's already a port, such as on Heroku, then it will use that one. Otherwise, such as on development, it will use 8000. And we also made it so that if there is a base URL in the environment, we'll use that. Otherwise, we'll use this localhost. And for that, we had to set the base URL ourselves using Heroku config set. And we set it to this part of our server URL for our API server. Let's go ahead and merge these into the same commit. So we will do an interactive rebase. So if we go to our git log now, we'll see that we have our initial configuration commit and then our data configuration commit. Those are nice and ready for when we're going to cherry pick them for use later on in the application. We've gotten our basic deploy out of the way, and then we figured out how to get our deploy working with external data through an API. Now, let's go over all the other miscellaneous stuff. And so we're going to go ahead and skip to the end. So we have our complete complex app, and we'll see what issues come up. So we'll check out a deploy complete branch, and then we'll cherry pick the 2 commits from earlier. And it looks like we'll have to do a little bit of processing on this. All right, so basically we need this port while keeping the new auth strategies. All right, that's a good resolution. And now we're going to test and see what happens when we try to deploy this to production. And it looks like we'll have to use force here. Then, when we reload the page, we get a server error, our favorite. All right, let's go ahead and check the logs. Okay, we cannot read property name of undefined. That is incredibly not useful. And of course, because everything is minified, it will not tell us where this is. Let's try to visit the home page and see what happens there. We get another server error. And this one cannot read property source of null. And so that is in a.normalize source. So if we Google that, we can see that, interesting, that's something in Vuetify. Okay. So this is a method in Vuetify. Specifically, it's a method in Vuetify's vImage component. So let's see where we're using vImage. All right, we're using it once in video list video, And oh hey look, we're passing in a source. So I bet we are passing something in incorrectly here. And as a matter of fact, some of our data that I created, I forgot to put in a thumbnail. So let's go ahead. We can either fix the data, but then our app is extremely fragile and will explode anytime something's missing a thumbnail. Or we can make it more robust by adding a default. Let's commit and deploy this, and then see how it works. And we'll see now that it's working correctly. And we can go to our various videos and tags, and even our admin pages. Let's go ahead and add an image URL and an actual video URL. And of course, a description. And then we'll see that it saves correctly, and the thumbnail and the video all work. So I can show you around the other stuff if you want. But I've already checked it out, and stuff works. We now have our entire Nuxt app deployed using SSR. All right, that is it for this video. So to review, we first deployed a very basic app to Heroku just after we had created it. And there's not a whole lot we had to do in here. It was a lot of setting configuration on Heroku. Then we made it work with our data API. And these ORs are so that it'll work in development and in production. And then we fixed a Vuetify bug. You'll be able to use the information from here and here pretty directly. Whereas after you get past this, the problems that crop up tend to be a lot more individual. But hopefully fixing the Vuetify bug helped to see a path to solving those sort of issues. All right, so we have it deployed. What is next for this series? Is this the complete Vue screencast site? We just have to put more videos on it? No, not quite. So there's still a lot of improvements that I want to do before even launching it. And then after launching it, I want to keep on making it better. So don't worry, this series is not going anywhere. And even once the site is good and this series slows down a little bit, I'll be making other types of videos as well. All right, so thanks for sticking with me to the end of the video. Be sure to subscribe below, and I will see you next time.